Hey everybody, this is FIDE Master Elliot Liu here with chess.com. Today I'm going to go over another one of my games. To give you some background about this game, it took place 2.5 years ago in the summer of 2006 in Ecuador. The tournament was the Pan American Championships, the under 18 division. I was 16 at the time. Although this was not the most important game of the tournament, which I ended up winning, this game was probably one of the favorites that I had, and it was the fourth round, and I'm white. And this game helped me go on a nice streak that helped win the tournament. In terms of themes surrounding this game, I'd say development and time and the two bishops. So probably those three things are what I'm going to be mainly concentrating on for this video. Okay, so here we go. Oh, and one last thing. My opponent is Christian Bolianos, so he was around 2200 FIDE at the time. Okay, so pawn e4. So I didn't really know what he did as black. So that pretty much explains my second move to keep things flexible. So I played knight c3 just to, see how he reacts. So now I have a choice between playing a type of closed Sicilian or potentially going into the open Sicilian. And I decided to go into the open Sicilian, so I transposed with knight f3. Okay, so this is your standard starting position for what is known as, some say, the Taimanov variation of the Sicilian defense. It's a very flexible system for black. A lot of different transpositions can occur, and this has been played millions of times. So as white, I played a very flexible move. It's probably not nearly the most aggressive, but I wasn't in the most aggressive of moods, so I just kept things nice and simple. And here, very early on in the game, my opponent made a mistake here on move 6. He played knight f6. Now this looks like a completely natural move, but actually it's a mistake, and I'll explain why. And this is why opening knowledge is very important, because you can see little nuances as I'm about to show you that will help in making decisions. So let me just give you a picture here. Let's say, let's go back a few moves. Let's say it's this position, and he plays knight f6 here. So it's the four knights variation or defense in the Sicilian, which has also been played many, many times. So if I continue with bishop e2 here, then black has several moves. For example, pawn to d6 to transpose into a classical Scheveningen, or the aggressive bishop b4 move, which is often a pawn gambit. But anyway, here's my point. So back to the game. The reason why knight f6 is a bad move is this. In this position, I immediately recognized that I could actually gain a big advantage by taking his knight on c6. And when he recaptures, play pawn to e5. So what's the big deal, you might be asking? Well, here it is. In this position, a main line for white is actually knight takes c6. Pawn takes knight, and pawn to e5. So imagine it's this position, and on move 7, I play bishop e2, and then black randomly decides to play pawn to a6, a move that does not make any sense. So see how this position transposed? But I actually gain a move with my bishop to e2 compared to his silly-looking pawn on a6. So I recognized this little difference in the positions, and I knew that this was an error. So here, instead of knight f6, there are numerous other moves, but the most common by far is queen to c7, entering a main line of the Taimanov. So his first big mistake was knight f6, because this leads to a bad transposition, because I get to have my bishop on e2 for his pawn on a6, so it works out favorably for me. So knight takes knight, pawn takes knight, and pawn to e5. Now here, of course, he should play knight to d5. This move is logical. Black is still worse off, but the game is far from over. So I would continue, like in normal lines, and play knight to e4, controlling the d6 square, potentially with the idea of playing c4 in the near future. So black is essentially down 2 moves here, not only from the start of the game for move 1, but also my bishop on e2 versus his pawn on a6. But all this is a moot point, however, because he played knight g8, and I nearly fell out of my chair when he played this move. I really do not understand why he did not play knight to d5, like in normal lines. So here he's much worse, but I'm faced with my first tough decision. So take a moment here and think about what you would do. I have a huge lead in development. He has all his pieces on the back rank. So that's one of the themes. Not only taking advantage of opening transpositions and opponent missteps in the opening, but also now we're going into taking advantage of a development. So black is obviously going to have to try and untangle somehow. Easily the most effective way to do this is by playing pawn to d5, breaking in the center. So I know he wants to do this. This is how he needs to get his pieces out. Now the question is whether to allow him to play this move or not. And this was the critical decision. So the 2 main moves that I considered here were bishop to f4, a very logical move, and the move I ended up playing, castles, which is also very natural. So take a moment here and see which one you think is better, which one you might do. Both have their advantages, but I think I made the right choice. So let's first look at bishop f4. This move develops another piece, protects an isolated pawn on e5, gets ready to bring my knight to e4, and then into this hole in d6. And also, and maybe most importantly, it stops black from playing his pawn to d5, or to d6 for that matter, because now I can just recapture en passant, and he loses his pawn. So all in all, bishop f4 looks extremely logical. So here's why I rejected it. If I play bishop f4, I realized he can actually redeploy his knight now to e7. And this is actually slightly annoying, because now he has the idea of bringing his knight out to g6, which attacks my bishop and my pawn. And there's no real easy way to defend against this. So a possible variation might be, let's say if I play knight e4, for example, threatening, the very nice knight d6 checkmate. So he plays knight g6, bishop g3, and then something annoying, like queen b6, attacking this b2 pawn, or maybe even queen a5 check. And see, now he has two things on this isolated pawn against my one, so it's actually hanging. And I don't necessarily want to go into an endgame with queen d2, for example. I'm not sure this is anything completely special for white. So, that's the main reason why I decided to play castles here. I actually allowed him to play d5 and attempt to untangle. But I had a good feeling that he would not have enough time to get completely untangled, and in the end I was right. So, it's important to see how I made that decision. Although I easily knew what move he would make, I still allowed him to do it anyway because I didn't think it was good enough to escape. So black really has no other moves here. If he just sits around doing nothing, I'm going to bring my knight to e4. There's a huge hole on d6. All my pieces are just going to flood into his position. His dark squares are extremely vulnerable, and once again, all his pieces are on the back rank. So he pretty much has to play d5, the move that he did. And likewise, my next move is fairly forced as well. If I don't capture en passant here, I've allowed him to almost guarantee himself completion of development. So en passant. And here I think my opponent makes another inaccuracy. I think he should have recaptured with the queen. Generally, as a defensive principle, you want to try to exchange the queens off the board, especially when you're underdeveloped. But he recaptured with his bishop. Knight to e4. And yet again, I think he makes another dubious move. I think he has to go back to e7 now. I think this is pretty much his only move. Already, black's position is really, really bad. His pawn on c6 is extremely weak. And in all honesty, I think it'll fall at some point. My bishop can come to f3 and pick on it. This bishop is terrible. It's blocked in by these pawns on a6 and e6. He isn't even ready to castle yet, so white has a huge advantage already, but it's still better than what he did. Also, another thing to make note of, something I was hoping for, of course, if he tries to take on h2 here, this pretty much loses by force if he gets greedy. So king takes bishop, queen h4 check. And now simply bishop f3. He has to go to c4 to maintain protection of the pawn. And now I can just kick his queen around for a while with pawn to b3. And if he goes back to c5, then I have the nice winning move of bishop to a3, removing the guard of the queen from this c6 pawn. So if the queen moves anywhere besides taking my bishop, I don't know, let's say to c3 or something, then queen d6 essentially wins the game on the spot. And of course, if queen takes bishop, then bishop takes pawn check, and checkmate. Okay, so anyway, I mean, I saw all that. It's not terribly hard to see, and he did too. But instead of going back to e7, as he should have, he went back to c7 instead. So probably a bit too optimistic. And here comes my second big decision of the game, and this one is extremely important. So I have three main moves here that I have to consider, and each of them are good. So it was very tough to decide which one I finally played. The three moves are queen takes queen, bishop e3, and bishop g5, the move I ended up playing. So now, as a question, I wonder which one you think you should do. All of them have their good ideas. Okay, so let's take a look at each one. If you're in this position on a computer program, it's very likely that it will suggest queen takes d8. And here's why. So if I take on d8 here, and he recaptures with his bishop, I can win a pawn here by playing knight d6 check, and wherever the king moves, I can take on c8, and then on a6. Again, see how this pawn on a6 comes back to bite him, because usually it's on a7 in these positions. And if he takes back with the king, I can check maybe here, knight d6 check. You know, something along these lines. I have the two bishops. He has a terrible pawn structure. I mean, I'm almost guaranteed to win this game. So a computer might like this move, queen takes d8, the best because it's almost guaranteeing the win of a pawn. I wanted more than that, though. I wanted to end the game very, very quickly. Another move I looked at was bishop e3. And this move is also extremely logical. My sole idea, not only to develop another piece, but also simply to put a piece on c5. And if my bishop gets to c5, it's terrible for black, because now I have control of the a3 f8 diagonal, and also my knight would be hoping to hop into d6 at some point. However, I decided to continue forcing development to happen, in my position that is, and I chose to play bishop to g5, which I personally think is the best move. So I'm not going to go over every potential black alternative in this position, but let's just say that it forces black to take my queen on d1, which he did. So as you can see, I have all my pieces developed compared to his one. So this is a huge time advantage, and his pawn structure is still equally bad.